In this video, I'll go over everything you need to know regarding the driving on the tracks in the Triforce Cup, the shroomless lines, the shortcuts and driving strats, and the coin routes. So without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. Just before getting started, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I can guarantee you won't regret it. Also, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and leave a comment because I'll probably respond to it. Yeehaw, bud. Starting things off, we got Wario's Gold Mine. This shouldn't be too lengthy since this is the most basic track in the game to drive. Shortly after the race begins, perform a right drift. Soft drift initially for a split second, then hold wide so you don't run into any wall. Also, while this doesn't matter too much online, you can approach this slight turn by driving straight as well. Anyway, as soon as you charge up a mini turbo, release it immediately into a left slide. Shortly after, begin a left drift and charge up another mini turbo before the downhill. Release it into a right slide. As you're about to exit the uphill section, begin a left drift. Charge up an easy mini turbo and release it into a right drift as soon as you're around the turn. You want to approach this turn wide after initially soft drifting, and while on the turn, drift tight, then release a super mini turbo and trick off the ramp. From here, just drive straight, aiming for the 2 sets of coins on the straight. You don't have to do this, but I prefer to perform a left slide into a right drift rather than just performing a right drift. It makes charging up a super mini turbo much easier. So yeah, release a super mini turbo shortly after getting it into a left hop into a left drift. Release another mini turbo just left of the middle of the track into a right slide into a trick off the ramp. A little after landing, begin a right drift. Release a mini turbo after the turn, immediately into a left drift. Release another mini turbo after the turn, immediately into a right soft drift. You'll have to hold wide a tiny bit to reposition yourself, but when you're on the straight before the downhill, hold wide until you charge up a super mini turbo. Release it as soon as you get it into a left hop. Before driving uphill, perform a right slide into a left drift and edge out a quick mini turbo into a right slide. Shortly after, begin a right drift and easily charge up a mini turbo. Release it onto the ramp and trick off it, and begin another right drift as you land, going into the next lap. Release a mini turbo as soon as you get it, and boom! It's just another day in the office. Putting it all together, chain 2 mini turbos before the first downhill. Before exiting the uphill section, begin a left drift. Release a mini turbo, then charge up a super mini turbo to release on the ramp while tricking off of it as well. Begin a right drift on the anti-gravity strip and release a super mini turbo after the turn into a mini turbo before tricking off the boost ramp. Chain 2 mini turbos on the turns on the minecart section, then release a super mini turbo on the second downhill. Edge out a mini turbo after the uphill and release one last mini turbo into a trick off the ramp into another mini turbo on the following lap. Sounds pretty easy, eh, bud? Well, this track is pretty boring since it's so basic in this game. As a result, there are no shortcuts and strats worth going over. As for coins though, this is a great track for coin collecting. You can easily collect up to 10 coins while driving tight, and you have so many alternatives as well. You have both sets of 2 coins next to the ramp, the 3 coins behind those 2 sets, the 2 sets of 3 wide coins on the minecart section, and the 3 individual coins on the wide path that's supposed to be a shortcut. But you should not go for these since you can collect the same amount of coins by taking the tight path. Regardless, the point here is that, especially on the minecart section and shortly after, you have a ton of coins you can collect. But with that, we're done with Wario's Gold Mine, so let's get things rolling on SNES Rainbow Road. SNES Rainbow Road is another pretty basic track, but there are a couple neat things you can do. After your starting boost runs out, begin a right drift. Soft drift as you're on the turn, and release a super mini turbo into a left hop. These waves are obviously pace-based, but if you see an opportunity to nail some tricks, I would suggest shaking your controller here. You could end up driving really slowly if you miss a trick using R or ZR here. Anyway, as you're about to go under the right thwomp, begin a right drift. Soft drift around the corner, then hold wide for the most part on the turn. As you touch the tight coins, soft drift tight for a split second, and that should be enough to charge up an ultra mini turbo. Release it into a left drift off the ramp and hold that drift on the second ramp as well. Fully soft drift as you land from the second ramp, then aim for the ramp shortcut. Release your ultra mini turbo before the ramp, then trick off the ramp. Shortly after landing, you'll be able to get a wave trick. Begin a right drift as soon as you land from the trick. Once again, when drifting around the corners, soft drift. Otherwise, for the most part, hold wide. Release another ultra mini turbo into a left hop on the following straight. If you can take the the right path without getting screwed over by the thwomp, go for it. Begin a right drift just before the track becomes 1 again, and soft drift around the corner. Release a super mini turbo into a left hop on the final straight, and you're giving her like it's your job. The summary of this track is pretty straightforward. After the first turn, release a super mini turbo. After the next 2 turns, release an ultra mini turbo and drift off the 2 ramps. Release another ultra mini turbo and trick off the ramp, thus cutting off the turn. Get a wave trick, then begin a right drift and charge up an ultra mini turbo. Release it on the split path straight. Position yourself to the right if possible. Then release a super mini turbo on the final turn. Yeehaw, bud! There's not much to mention when it comes to the shortcuts on this track, but you can use the middle path ramp to your advantage, even shroomless. It's a little precise and really isn't worth going for online, but it is a bit faster than just taking one of the 2 paths, so I thought I'd mention it. This is a pretty solid track for coin collecting. You can collect up to 9 coins while driving tight, which is pretty great since a few of your alternative options aren't that far outside of the main lines. You can collect up to 4 wide coins on this turn, the 3 wide coins on the turn before the last set, and the 3 wide coins on the final turn. So yeah, you should be in a pretty good spot when it comes to coins on this track. But with that, SNES Rainbow Road has been covered, so let's keep on giving her on Ice Outpost. Now this is where the fun begins. Ice Outpost is a pretty hype track all around. When the race begins, you immediately want to perform a left drift. Soft drift initially, then hold wide until you charge up a mini turbo. Release it as soon as you get it, immediately into a right hop into another left drift. This isn't all that necessary online, but it could help with keeping first. Anyway, after the first turn, release your mini turbo into a right slide into a right drift. Charge up an ultra mini turbo on the big turn, and release it into a left hop after the straight. As you approach the coins, perform a left hop or slide into a right drift and quickly charge up a mini turbo. Shortly after charging up your mini turbo, release it into a left hop into a left slide into a right drift. Charge up a super mini turbo and align yourself with this line, then release your super mini turbo just before leaving the yellow path. Get 2 tricks off the ramps of the first shortcut and hold left before nailing the second trick. Holding left isn't necessary on line, but you can perform the next shortcut a bit faster by doing so. Anyway, begin a left drift as soon as you land and hold wide, following to the second shortcut. You should easily be able to charge up a mini turbo, which you want to release into a mini turbo trick off the first ramp. Perform a quick left slide as you land, then trick off the second ramp. Drive straight, then as soon as you can drift onto the yellow path, perform a left drift onto it. Release a mini turbo into a right hop into a left drift. Run into the right side of the spin booster, then switch back to the green path. Charge up an ultra mini turbo, and as soon as you're on the straight before the glider, release your ultra mini turbo immediately into a right drift. Charge up a mini turbo and let the glider release it for you. Dive down while holding left and begin a right drift as soon as you land. When taking the ending shortcut, make sure to hold right as you mini turbo trick off the first ramp, and you'll trick off the second ramp every time. Edge out one last mini turbo if you want, and there you go. It's just another day in the office at Ice Outpost. Summing things up, when the race begins, chain 2 mini turbos on the first turn, then release an ultra mini turbo after the big turn. Edge out a quick mini turbo on the straight before the double cut. Release a super mini turbo into the first shortcut and nail the 2 tricks. Then perform a mini turbo trick into a final trick on the second shortcut. Release a mini turbo as you switch from the green to the yellow path, then transition back to the green path as you charge up an ultra mini turbo. Release it into a mini turbo off the glider ramp. Perform a mini turbo trick into one last trick on the ending shortcut with an additional mini turbo if you'd like, and that's that. You're giving her all day long. We're gonna get right into the coin route since the shortcuts worth mentioning have already been mentioned in the shroomless lines. Anyway, you should not run into many problems on this track when it comes to coins. You can collect up to 10 coins while driving tight, and you have a ton of alternatives if you need to go out of your way for coins. The only alternative on the green path is the 3 coins on the anti-gravity turn, but it's worth mentioning that every coin on the green path is generally in the same place on the yellow path, which can be really helpful since you don't ever take the yellow path for coins in the shroomless lines. So yeah, the coins available to you double if you include the yellow path as well. But with that, we're done with the driving on Ice Outpost, so let's finish strong on Hyrule Circuit. Hyrule Circuit is a really fun track to drive in my opinion. When the race begins, you want to begin a left drift immediately. Position yourself to the left and release your mini turbo after the turn, immediately into a right soft drift. After collecting the first of the 2 coins, release your mini turbo into a left drift. Soft drift around the turn and release a super mini turbo into a right hop, slightly positioning yourself to the right of the straight. As you approach the ramp, begin a right drift on the big turn. Charge up an ultra mini turbo, and as you find yourself on the straight before the glider, release your ultra mini turbo into a left hop and eventually into a right slide into a left drift. Let your glider release your mini turbo for you, and while aiming slightly right, dive down for a little less than a second, then hold back for a tiny vector. Aim to land on the coin after the small set of stairs and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Charge up an ultra mini turbo on the big staircase turn and release it as soon as you're on the straight. After leaving the final step, perform a left slide into a right drift. Stay tight while collecting the first coin and release your mini turbo after the turn into a left hop into a trick off the ramp. After landing, perform a left slide into a right drift. Quickly charge up a mini turbo before the following ramp and release it into a left hop into a trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift as soon as you land. It's really important to soft drift initially since you have to hold wide for the rest of this drift. Anyway, charge up a mini turbo, and a bit before touching the off-road, release your mini turbo and immediately neutral hop. I'd also suggest holding right on your stick a little before landing since it can help for repositioning. Anyway, hop into a left drift after landing and charge up a mini turbo. Release it after the turn. Soft drift for the entirety of the final turn and release an ultra mini turbo into a trick off the ramp. Sounds pretty simple, right? Just win, forehead! Altogether, chain 2 mini turbos on the first 2 turns, then release a super mini turbo on the following turn. Charge up an ultra mini turbo on the big turn, and release it on the straight before the glider. Release a mini turbo off the glider and perform some vector shenanigans for some additional time save. Begin a left drift as you land and release an ultra mini turbo after the staircase turn. Perform a mini turbo into a trick off the left path ramp, then edge out another mini turbo before tricking off the final castle ramp. Release a mini turbo just before clipping the off-road to make the shortcut, then release another mini turbo after the following turn. Release an ultra mini turbo into a trick off the final ramp, and just like that, you're a natural at Hyrule Circuit. Alright, we got a few things to talk about here. First and foremost, the beginning shortcut. It's the shroom spot, and it saves a good chunk of time. Considering there's also an item box on this ramp, this shortcut is absolutely worth going for online. Additionally, if you pull a shroom at the first set on lap 1, you should take this off-road shortcut. It's not that great compared to the others, but at the very beginning, you can easily pass people in front of you who don't pull a shroom. And of course, you can also shroom through the ending shortcut, which is a bit faster. Speaking of the ending shortcut, the plant could be a problem for you on lap 3. To prepare for this, take a slightly wider approach at the edge, and you shouldn't have any problems. And while you should wait until the beginning shortcut if it's not lap 3 and you only have 1 mushroom, in any other case, this little shroom spot could help you out quite a bit too. Oh yeah, on lap 3, make sure to just release a super mini turbo before the final ramp. No ultra mini turbo is needed here. This is probably the best track in the game when it comes to coins. You can easily collect more than 10 coins by driving tight, and even then, you have a ton of alternatives. You have the floor-wide coins on the big turn, the right path coins, and the coins on the ending right path. Considering how many coins you can collect while driving tight, you should be able to collect coins with ease, of course as long as no one steals them from you. But with that, we're done with the driving on the tracks in the Triforce Cup. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for next week where I go over the strategies on these tracks. As for this week, I got a bit of a weird video coming out tomorrow that you might not see coming, but I think it's one worth going over, even if it is part of the main driving lines. Regardless, it'll be a great week. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.